So if you can say your name for the record.
Yeah, Rahul Yates.
Okay, awesome. Can you share your experiences as a biracial individual in today's society, particularly in light of the increase in hate crime incidents?
So I think to put it in the most concise way possible, my understanding and relationship with my biracial identity has definitely changed over time. I would say the biggest things that like created some kind of tension with that identity was that there's just not a lot of representation within society, media, etc. when I was growing up. Now there's definitely more, but still not enough. And I think that also our society struggles with like this idea of like being more than one race. So just because so much of our society, especially American society, is very racialized, just because of its history, and like that has been very much institutionalized to the point where today it's still hard to really imagine and like understand and also like accommodate people who are more than one race, even though the Loving v. Virginia, which like legalized interracial marriage in the US was in 1967, and yet almost 60 years ago, it's like 60 years later, we are not I think that where there's still much more progress to be done. And so my experience really reflects that. Being racially ambiguous, not having a strong community of other multiracial people growing up really made me not understand my own my own identity. My parents could only do so much, but they themselves are monoracial and have not had the same experiences. And so taking all of that, I think taking all of that together, I think that's why I struggled so much with my identity. And it was only through like very conscious, deliberate reflection that I took upon myself and like with like other multiracial people and groups as I was as I was like in high school, that I really started to understand, like truly understand my identity. And so, in the context of rising hate crimes and being like, I think especially in 2020, with the murder of George Floyd, and since then there has been a very strong racial reckoning in our society. I was like 15, 16 when that happened, and I mean, I remember very much seeing like the changes that my school made. It was an independent school that struggled with diversity, etc. There was like a reckoning within there, and that was like within my school. And I feel like that gives me a like kind of like a lens through which I think what is now happening throughout the country, like that helps me understand it because like my school really had to think about like its institutionalized practices and its curriculum and its representation of marginalized voices. And that is something that I think the country as a whole really started to have to do again. I think, and I was really just a kid for this, but I think a lot of the time, I think there's this kind of misunderstanding that we had like Barack Obama as a president, so like racism is gone. Like, what more can you do if you have like a non-white president? And yeah, I think, but I mean, that's obviously not the case. And now, with so many more complex identities being added into this conversation, I would say multiracial identity is one of them. Within like rising hate crimes and stuff, I think that just reflects that our society has not yet truly understood itself and each other, and that hate crimes are a reflection of people's prejudices because they have not been taught otherwise, and that reflects like that just reflects pitfalls within our society. And so as a multiracial person, I mean, I also recognize my privilege in the sense that like being mixed with white versus being mixed with something else. Like yes, I do identify as a person of color, but my experience is not necessarily that of like I'm a person of color, but I'm mixed with white. I'm racially ambiguous, but I kind of could look white in certain contexts, and certainly I'm not like the color of my skin and my features do not necessarily lend themselves to um, the kind of like racism and discrimination that we see most frequently. And so I do have that like privilege in that sense that I can kind of watch all this from the side. And still, I think that, but still, it is very disappointing because as a multiracial individual, when I see other multiracial individuals of different mixes being discriminated against, and honestly, anybody being discriminated against, it still feels like all of us are being harmed because it shows that like people are not understanding that person's identity, which means that they will probably also not understand my identity. And so while I might not be the recipient of that racism or discrimination, I'm still it still does affect me. And so I guess that's how I view it. So I mean, it's very disappointing to see the rise in incidents, and I think that the only way we can really go forward is if we take a step back and think about why these are still happening, even when it's been so many decades since, like as I said, multiracial, like interracial marriage was legalized. Even before that, like end of segregation, and yet there's so many institutionalized practices that I've learned about in school that perpetuate the same discrimination that happened 100 years ago. And while I mean, it's definitely to a lesser extent now, it's still not perfect by any means. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much my answer. It's just like being multiracial now in today's society, in light of these recent hate incidents, it's, I would say like, it's still like I think being multiracial just kind of adds a complexity to my understanding of these hate incidences. But at the end of the day, it's still, I think I still have, and like other multiracial people still have the same reaction to them, which is like, we must do better. And as a multiracial person, I think where my place is within this is that I have this ability to be like in spaces of color and also like more white, like whiter spaces. And so I can kind of like use my identity to build more to like kind of ideally build more connections. Not that multiracial people are supposed to solve racism, but I do think we can like use our unique like presence to help foster connections where like that kind of connections that have not necessarily existed yet.
Have you encountered any resistance or adversity? I mean, you kind of touched upon this, but how have you responded to or overcome those challenges? Being biracial and experiencing experiencing any sort of adversity or challenge that you think maybe your white counterparts wouldn't experience, or other
Hmm.
others.
Yeah, I think the most common adversity that I've experienced has been other people not understanding like what I am in the sense of like my first name is ethnic. It's like Indian. My last name is white. People are not usually able to pronounce my first name, and I don't think my first name necessarily matches up with like how I end up looking. Like you see my name on like a sheet and then I appear, and I don't think those two necessarily match, which I think is very common of multiracial people. And I think that has like that lack of understanding and like also being like racially ambiguous has made it so that like every time I enter a room, I'm very I feel very aware of my place in it and that I will have to explain myself more like why I'm there more than others will have to. For example, when I like in college, I've been in a lot of South Asian spaces and I'm very involved in that community. And yet I know that when I enter that room, if there's like somebody, like I have to make myself known and like make it known why I'm here. I'm not just like some white guy who cares about Indian culture, but this is also my culture. And like, I think just having to be aware of that myself is always a struggle because it's very tiring to always, I think, like just have to keep thinking more than everybody else is about like why you're in that room or why you are contributing. Like, I think why when I'm in spaces of color, I often feel like I shouldn't necessarily be there because like my perspective, like I'm mixed with white, I have a lot of privilege with that. But at the same time, when I'm in white spaces, I feel like a person of color and I feel like I don't have the experiences that they do because I'm very like culturally in tune with my Indian identity. And I think that's like been the biggest adversity is that there's never really a true space in which to belong. And I guess responding and overcoming to it is doing a lot of self-reflection and realizing that I don't have to justify my presence and I can share why I'm there, but I shouldn't let people tell me that I shouldn't be there. And I think that's the biggest thing is overcoming like yes, it might not look like I fit in, but I know that I do fit in regardless of what the other people think and that I still have a valuable contributions to share and that I should be more than allowed to be in that space. And it's more just like allowing myself to be comfortable in that space and like releasing some of that tension that is built up when like I enter a room and I'm like, oh gosh, like nobody here looks like me and nobody here is going to understand why I'm here. And oh, also finding more of a community with other multiracial people and like hearing from their experiences, hearing how they deal with it, a lot of like mutual empowerment. And I think the beauty of the multiracial community is that even if you are not of the same mix, which is like there's a lot, I mean, like, yeah, even if you're not of the same mix, you can still like relate to each other's experiences, like at least like 50 to like 70% of like each other's experiences as mixed people will be very similar, and that allows us to like come together just like any other racial or ethnic community does because of our like shared experiences, even though there is some more variation within it, that we are like finding that community and like uplifting ourselves and like valid like also just even hearing somebody else validate your experiences and you know you don't have to like explain it to them. Like when I'm in a multiracial space, I know I can just share without having to like preface my background and without having to like explain how I got to this experience. I can just dive straight into it and the other people in the room will understand. And that I think is really beautiful and that has helped me overcome a lot of the tension that I've experienced like outside of these multiracial spaces because I know that like there's other people going through it and two, like we are still valid like members of that community. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that that's really important in terms of creating these spaces where you can congregate and find safety, and then use that as a pathway of empowerment in essentially making or just raising awareness in terms of what that lived experience is like as a biracial person, a multiracial person. Um, and I think that relates to my next question. In what ways do you believe sharing personal narratives like yours can contribute to a broader conversation on civil rights and racial inequality?
I think when I share my experience, what I'm always looking to do is to have it like I always think that by sharing my experience, I'm doing something for more than just myself and doing something for others who can resonate with my words. And because I know that I have personally benefited from that and like seeing other people who with whom I share some like similar identity, like other multiracial people, when they share something that's relatable, it is very inspiring because it's like, okay, this person is like all the way up there and they have done this. Like it's if like a celebrity or something does it, and it's like, okay, they've made it this far in life and they're still comfortable and open to like sharing about their experience. So that means like I can too. If I think it very much works like that, even though that's kind of like cliche. But so I think to this broader conversation of civil rights and racial equity, it goes back to my point of this lack of understanding in our society. And the only reason we have inequality between races and ethnicities is because we don't understand each other and we don't think that we are all like the same. And yes, we might look different and have different backgrounds, but at the end of the day, like 90% of our lives are the same. Like we all get up, go do our tasks, etc. And it's just like this cultural elements, these like physical elements that are different. And unfortunately, this lack of understanding has existed for too long and it has continued to exist. And so by sharing my voice, I hope to help reduce this lack of understanding. If somebody reads like something I've said or something that any other multiracial person has said, and they then better understand what the multiracial identity is like, then maybe they will stop making comments, like making microaggressive comments to other multiracial people, like, oh, but you're not really that ethnicity or race, or you're not really, or like, which side do you like more, etc. Like comments like that, I think by like sharing my voice, those comments ideally decrease because and though the place where those comments came from, which is a lack of understanding, has now decreased because there's now more understanding in that person. So that's like ultimately my goal.
Any specific messages or lessons you hope others will take away from hearing your story in the Oral History Archive?
I think the biggest lesson that I want people to take away is just like put in more effort to understand others. And I think it's something that everybody struggles with. I know, yes, like I mean I've been saying like understand each other and stuff, but I still struggle to understand and entirely like really respect other people's identities sometimes. I think that's just part of the human condition, but also part of something that we have been like we've been taught from society and like the adults around us and stuff. And so I think what I want people to take away from this series from oral history projects is that it is it is actually quite easy to like change your views if you just put in a little bit of effort. And so like listening to an oral history series or like reading about people's experiences are all ways that are fairly low effort that have such a high reward because now you are become one more person who no longer has a lack of understanding or a misunderstanding of some other like race, ethnicity, or some societal issue. And it's not just one person because then you then pass that on to the people around you, the people who come after you, even the people who came before you, like your parents, etc. I think especially my generation has had a very much shared struggle with like explaining to like the adults around us, like you can't say those things, or like this is how to view this like identity or something. And so I think that is what I would want people to take away from a project like this one.
Is there anything else you'd like to share before we log off?
No, I mean, yeah, I guess not much really. I think this is just a very like I really like to participate and see efforts like these happen because it's like doing the work that our society does not value enough at all. And so I mean, I just like kudos to you and your team for putting this together. And I'm just glad that I can be a part of it.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story. I think it's so
Mhm.
important. And I appreciate that you said it really is easy to change your views if you have that intention and you
Mhm.
take that time out to learn. It opens
Mhm.
your mind. It makes your world bigger. So we hope that we can put our best foot forward.